Good evening. I'm calling the April 29th, 2020 Select Board meeting to order. First, a few logistics. The first one being getting the slide to move. We're being broadcast on RCTV, Verizon Channel 33, Xfinity Channel 22. Also available on Facebook Live, the link you can get from RCTV. This is a virtual meeting to model and exhibit proper social distancing, of course. We are accepting public comments by email. Please send an email to selectboard@ci.reading.ma.us. We will try to monitor comments during the meeting. And for the public comments, we ask that you include your full name and address, no disparaging comments. Please limit the size and content of your email so that it can be read in less than 2 minutes. We are always open to suggestions on how to improve our meetings and participation. The town of Reading is working hard to provide resources to the community, especially for those who are hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Please reach out if you need help, are willing to help, or have questions. The emails and phone numbers are all listed here on this slide. Once again, I want to thank all the first responders and other essential workers that are working so hard to help us survive and thrive in this crisis, if thrive is the right word. We will get through this together. All these folks are true heroes for us. I want to briefly mention that next Wednesday, May the 6th, is National Nurses Day. I'd like to give a shout out to all of our town and school nurses. Thank you so much for your service to the town, and to nurses who live in town, work in town, assist people from town, and in fact, all nurses. Thank you all very much. Tonight, in terms of agenda, we have our state legislative team. Senator Jason Lewis, Representatives Rich Hagerty and Brad Jones are joining us. I'll ask them to speak momentarily right after we walk through the rest of the agenda. Please feel free to email questions that you may have for our legislative team. After the team speaks, they'll be followed by presentations on our COVID-19 response, first from Emmy Dove, Chair of the Board of Health, and then many members of the command team will be offering updates. We will then have public comment, followed by a final review of the liaison assignments. Next, we'll discuss the RMLD dividend payment and renewal of the 20-year agreement. Vanessa and Karen will lead us in the discussion, and John Stempek, the chair of the RMLD commissioners, is in the meeting with us, and he'll join us for that discussion as well. We'll then talk about future meeting topics, approve meetings, approve some minutes, talk about some minutes, and then we will go from there. So with that, let me first introduce Senator Jason Lewis, who will be followed by Representative Hagerty and then Representative Jones. I shared a few questions with these folks, and I know they have their own comments. Again, if the public has questions for them, please email them to us. Hopefully they can answer some of those questions. Senator Lewis, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, select board members and town leaders and members of the community. I hope that you and your loved ones are all safe and well. And I want to echo what the chairman just said in terms of our gratitude for our Reading first responders, for our local public health staff, for our medical professionals, and all of our frontline workers who are doing extraordinary work during this crisis. You have our profound gratitude. At the state government level, myself and Representative Jones and Representative Hagerty and our colleagues working very closely with Governor Baker and his team, we've been pursuing what I would describe as kind of a two-pronged strategy to deal with this crisis. First is that we are taking a lot of steps, as you're well aware, to contain the spread of the virus and minimize hospitalizations and deaths. Bottom line, this is all about saving lives in our communities and in Massachusetts. And I really, and I know, and we all know that the steps we've been taking around physical distancing and hygiene and many others are really making a difference. And our local hospitals are doing a great job preparing for the surge and managing through it so that everyone who needs care, whether it's for COVID-19 or for another health emergency, is able to get the care that they need. And we're going to continue to take these steps to minimize the spread of the virus. The second strategy that we've been pursuing is to mitigate as much as we can the devastating economic impact that this crisis is having on our communities, on our residents, on our small businesses, our nonprofits, our municipalities, and others. Our state government and our federal government, have been working hard, and we've taken numerous actions to seek to address the crisis. Let me just quickly highlight a few of these, and I'm sure the other members of the delegation who've worked hard on many of these pieces of legislation will touch on them as well. First of all, unemployment benefits have been strengthened and expanded to an unprecedented degree, actually, so that virtually all workers who are laid off or furloughed or see their earnings reduced can access assistance through unemployment benefits. We've also taken a lot of steps to try to help our small businesses, obviously our restaurants and nonprofits and others that have needed emergency assistance as well. Emergency funding has been provided for public health purposes, for hospitals, nursing homes, and other healthcare providers. We've also provided legislation to help our cities and towns to give you budgeting flexibility, permitting relief, and the ability to postpone the spring town elections and town meetings. We extended both the state and federal tax filing deadlines, placed a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for renters, homeowners, and also for small businesses as well. Liability protections for healthcare workers during this crisis. We also took action to cancel MCAS testing for the remainder of the school year. We heard loud and clear from our teachers and parents and superintendents about that. We also authorized electronic notarization for real estate and other business transactions. And that's important for those sectors of our economy to continue to function. We know there's a lot more we need to do working in partnership with you all. So some of the things we're doing are further work to protect the residents and staff in our nursing homes and other facilities that house vulnerable populations. We're looking at ways to strengthen our social safety net for low-income families. We are working on legislation right now that I hope we will have done next week that will enable Reading and other towns to hold remote town meetings in the spring if you so desire. We're also working on legislation to enable more options for voting by mail and early voting, and to protect poll workers for the fall elections, the September 1st state primary and the general election. And we know that in case there is going to be a municipal special election in the summer in Reading, we know that we need to also include the flexibility that you need for that election as well. And then lastly, just wanted to mention that the Education Committee, and I chair that committee in the Senate, is going to be holding a special oversight hearing next week, Wednesday, to understand better how remote learning is going across all of districts in Massachusetts. So members of the public will be welcome to tune in, and we should be able to learn a lot about the successes and the challenges we're facing to educate our students while our schools are closed. Just wanted to wrap up with giving you a brief budget outlook, and I'm sure Representative Jones and Representative Hagerty will have more to say here. For the current fiscal year that we're in right now, fiscal year 20, we don't expect any 9C budget cuts. We think we have the capacity to manage through the shortfall in state revenues for this fiscal year. For the next fiscal year that starts July 1st, fiscal year 21, I cannot sugarcoat it. The outlook is grim. The normal budget process is delayed probably by several months over what it would typically be. The House and Senate and the Baker administration held a new consensus revenue hearing on April 14th. We essentially had to restart the state budget process. And according to the experts who testified, the state can expect a revenue loss in the next fiscal year of anywhere between $4 and $6 billion compared to what we were expecting just prior to the pandemic. That's about a 13 to an 18% reduction in state revenues. So that is dramatic. I mean, put that in context, that's quite a bit more than during the Great Recession about a decade ago. These experts also expect that the unemployment rate in Massachusetts could reach as high as 20%, which I think we all recognize is just devastating. We haven't seen an unemployment rate that high in any of our living memories. The state's rainy day fund will help, and it's great. It's very a good thing that the state has been prudent in our budgeting over the last decade. But the big unknown right now is how much additional assistance we will be getting from the federal government for the state and for our cities and towns. We're expecting that to be included in the next federal stimulus bill that Congress is working on. And I really want to thank our congressional delegation. They've fought hard for us and for all the many needs that are out there. But we really need them to come through in the next federal stimulus bill to provide funding for states and municipalities. So that is a big unknown still right now. We hope to provide more guidance to Reading for your budgeting process and to our other communities regarding what you can expect in Chapter 70 aid for schools and also unrestricted local aid. Those are the two big local aid accounts. We know that's critical to help you build your budget. So as soon as we have more information, the delegation will certainly provide that to you, and we're hopeful to be able to do that within the next month. So I'll just wrap up by saying that the partnership between local government and our state government, is always important, but it's more important than ever. I think we would agree in these very difficult times. And I know we'll all continue to work closely together to first and foremost keep our residents safe and to mitigate as much as we can the economic hardship from this pandemic. Thank you again for this opportunity to join you this evening, and happy to take questions.
Jason, do you want to take questions directly, or should we hear from the representatives first?
I think probably maybe hear from the other members of the delegation, and then maybe we can take questions together.
Great. That sounds great. Brad, do you want to lead off?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to join you tonight. I think Jason touched on a lot of the highlights. I would say that I think one of the critical decisions that we made in the Commonwealth was, he mentioned the rainy day fund, and that has already been kind of given accolades to Massachusetts that we're in a better position, although no state's probably in a great position, but that we're in a far better position to deal with some of the impacts that we're going to see on the revenue front. I think next week we'll probably get the first full glimpse of the bad news as April's revenues come in. And while we've put off the tax filing deadline to July 15th for the state, obviously we've seen in basically every other category of income, whether it's sales tax, meals tax, hotel, everything down. So that'll give us a first kind of full month glimpse. March revenues were a little stilted because some of those are collections that came in February that are recorded in March. So that's going to be the first thing. And I think as Jason touched on, we've obviously seen the federal government step in a couple of areas, and I know there's at least one more hopefully big aid package that's being discussed, which has hopefully a sizable amount of money set aside for states and municipalities to hopefully backfill some of that shortfall in revenues. But as I think he said, you can't sugarcoat it. There's no good news out there. Depending on what the federal government does, it only makes the bad news a little bit less bad. But our rainy day fund is, a very healthy number. That's critical. We have passed, I think, as Jason said, a number of pieces of legislation that are sort of, let's say, have some municipal focus in parts. We've done a tremendous amount on the unemployment, not only from traditional unemployment and accessing that system, but because of some of the federal expansion, building a whole new platform that just went online about a week ago and has had hundreds of thousands of people sign up. And to put it in context, to take an agency that about 2.5 months ago had 50 people working in it, taking maybe 7,000 or 8,000 claims in a week, is now an agency that's shifted over and have about 1,000 people working 7 days a week, dealing with hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of claims, and up to the point where I think they were making now like 10,000 calls back a day to try to get back to people, to make sure they had the right information, to make sure they were filling the right data in. It's truly been, and that's just a glimpse of the Herculean effort in one aspect. And I was on a phone call with DCF workers who are trying to make sure children in need are protected. And they're very much on the front line too, going into homes and dealing DDS workers dealing with group homes, people that are dealing with SNAP benefits. So they're part of the frontline workers, along with our police, our fire, our nurses, our medical professionals, and it's amazing. And I know there's a concern about the PPE, and obviously we had an inadequate supply, and that's how we had an inadequate supply and a small universe that needed it, and now we have an expanded universe that need it. And while supply is maybe better than where it was, certainly, and we've seen some great companies in our Commonwealth adjust and get into the manufacturing of something they probably never even envisioned making, and are now staffing up, gearing up, and and I think sort of wherever we're headed, that's going to become a permanent part, or at least a fixture in our life going forward for the foreseeable future. I know there's some concern about the election. I know Jason touched on it. I know there's an election bill being talked about. The Secretary of State has his thoughts. I think he's weighing in and filing a piece of legislation in a few weeks. We have some special state elections underway right now for some vacant legislative seats that are kind of experimenting with. We expanded sort of how absentee ballots could be applied. We let a sort of mail-in and enhanced early voting. So I think some of the experiences of that may be replicated for the fall. I know the mail-in is an issue that we probably have to get around and how that's handled. I'd like to have a discussion, quite frankly, with our town clerks and how that's all going to work. There's so many different aspects to this, and there's so many, tremendous, wonderful stories of people coming forward in the community, in the Commonwealth, and the country. It's good to have a delegation that works together. I'm in touch with Bob and the chief. And whenever, I'm needed, or if they need anything, please feel free to reach out. And that goes too for anybody in the community. We've had, sadly, dozens of people in the community reach out for issues that they've had to deal with the state. Some of them traditional issues dealing with the registry of motor vehicles, but most often unemployment questions. And obviously work continues on Route 28, and we know that's generated some questions and issues in the community as well. And people haven't been shy about expressing their opinions. Again, available for any questions. I do think that we want to get you some numbers real quick, but I would certainly say whatever predisposition you have to be relative to conservative budgeting, it's probably a good year to double down on that. And I don't say that to be alarmist, but having been a municipal official, I know it's a lot easier to add back in than it is to take out after the fact. And we kind of sort through a million good ideas that we have right now. There's dozens of pieces of legislation that when we read them, they sound good. Most of them all cost money, and we have to match those desires up with our resources, figuring in what the resources we get from the federal government are, what are the resources we have at the state level, resources at the municipal level, and try to patch that together and have those two lines meet in a place that's sustainable while meeting the most critical needs of the people of the Commonwealth and our communities. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll pass the camera back, I guess.
Thanks, Brad. Rich, can we ask you to make some comments, please?
Sure. Thanks so much to everybody for your continued good work, and particularly the public safety officials who've been working so hard over the course of particularly the last few months here during these unprecedented times. I won't give the full synopsis again. I think that both the Senator and Representative Jones accurately kind of described what the state has been going through, and I know you all are doing your work following kind of what we're doing and communicating with us, letting us know what you need. I will say, just as a former local official, something that I've been talking with folks about is the important role that supplemental budgets could play in the coming year to make sure that we are being conservative with our budgeting measures over the course of the next several months, and that you are going to be able to add back in resources hopefully as the economy begins to rebound. And I think the state's going to take a real serious look at adding more supplemental budgets in as we get a better picture of what we're looking at from a financial standpoint of view. As Jason said, when you're talking about $4 to $6 billion hole, at the end of the day, the feds are going to have to come to the table. They're going to have to step up. They're going to have to write a check and support our efforts here because, without that, then the picture's going to be that much more dire. So I think we're going to get a better picture of that over the course of the next several weeks. I think as the feds hopefully dig in. And then beyond that, I just want to talk a little bit about, kind of the services that our offices have been providing. And I think that, we've been in constant communication with a lot of different folks in the community, whether whether it's helping with UI benefits or whether it's helping businesses even navigate many of the federal programs through the SBA. That's a real big part of making sure that we're in a position to have our economy rebound and come back in a manner that is able to get us back kind of with our feet underneath us. And Massachusetts is well positioned, right? We're a state that's competitive in so many different areas, particularly life sciences, hospitals, technology, and others. And because of that, fortunately, I think that once we get past this, I think Massachusetts is going to respond and be in a better position than most other states. So that's some good news for us to be looking at. And again, we are seeing some positive things happen out there in our communities, and I see it in Reading all the time as well. People are responding, people are contributing. And so as challenging as these moments are, I would mention that, we are seeing a lot of positive things. And I think that we should all continue to look for those as we deal through these challenging times.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Rich. Board members, any questions for legislators here?
We either answered everything or bored you to death.
Never known you all to be shy.
Well, you got my questions in advance, so to be fair. Karen, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and we really appreciate how hard you're working for us. And I know you're having to do this from many different angles. One of the things I was wondering that I didn't hear any of you mention was whether there's any legislation to expand testing. Wouldn't it be great if we could get some help, just like we give seniors and other community members flu shots? Is there any talk about spending money on testing and helping communities do a much larger job of testing, or are we thinking that's going to be through your primary care doctors?
Anyone want to tackle that?
Well, I can just say, I'm happy to at least make a few comments anyways. I think that, while those conversations, I think, have a time and place, I think that one of the things that I've, read quite a bit about is some of the, that a lot of these tests that are out there right now are insufficient. They don't really do the job, particularly the antibody testing. And that's something that we want to make sure that if we're going to be spending money on, increased testing across the board, that in fact we're not getting false positives, and that we're not getting bad data. We want to make sure we have the best data available to us to be able to actually make informed decisions. And I will say, obviously, the Partners in Health effort that's going on right now with regards to tracking, that's ramping up, and I think that's a real positive. I think that's going to give us a much better idea of who in fact is infected, of course, and who they've been in touch with. And that's going to provide an enormous amount of data to better understand where COVID-19 is and where it's going, how it's being moved around, all of those things. So I think that that effort is really, really important to kind of how we tackle this disease.
I would only add, Mr. Chairman, that the testing, it seems like it's hard to remember what day it is, but, back even a few weeks ago when, testing was a couple hundred tests a day, now we're approaching 10,000 tests a day. So I would agree, Karen, that, the goal needs to be increased testing. And obviously the first place was people that were high risk and people that were on the front lines, but expanding that out. But as Rich said, you want to make sure you have a testing regimen that's scalable, affordable, and reliable, so that you're not getting false positives and false negatives and creating the false sense of security. And the expanded testing is one of the reasons why sometimes you see the numbers jump all over the place. You test a high-risk population, the numbers are high, but as you kind of go out and maybe start to reach into part of the public that maybe not as high risk, those numbers come down. That's going to give us more reliable data about where we're at truly in dealing with this pandemic. But I would agree. I think it's a valid point. I think it's something clearly we were interested in. The part of the problem originally was part of testing was these swabs, and some of the materials from the swabs were in short supply, and now that's kind of ratcheting up. Some of the places we relied on for some of these things were China and Italy, which are obviously kind of the beginning of the pandemic, and then the country that sort of led the way of creating the idea of how bad it could really be. So I think we're trying to create, some of the lessons from this is hopefully going forward, having a home-based reply and ability to deal with this, and not necessarily saying we have to be reliant on for some of these critical things, foreign sources, or at least make sure you have a stockpile that's a little bigger than it was.
Thank you.
Ann, did I see? Sorry, I caught you with a glass in your hand. Did I see you had your hand up, Ann?
No, I think I was going to comment that Karen had her hand up.
Oh, great.
But
And I
thank
see
you for
Carlo.
the delegation for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Carlo, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for coming, gentlemen. Senator Lewis, you mentioned that important meeting on the 14th when they were crunching the numbers, the 4 to 6 billion, the unemployment. How often does that team plan to meet to update and revise? Because I'm guessing the state's not going to get one lump check. I'm sure they're going to do it. Are they going to do it quarterly? Are you going to talk to the congressional and U.S. senators? Like, how often are we going to get updates on, how bad it is?
I don't mind jumping in, Mr. Chairman. I'll defer to Jason, but I
No,
would
go
say
ahead,
in
Brad.
terms of federal funding and that, some of the money comes into different buckets. And I think we're going to get, once we start getting, April's full picture, and then hopefully we're able to tie that into, by the time we get into mid-May, a plan for hopefully gradual reopening, that we'll get to see those kind of lines and see what we really have locally, so to speak, statewide, but also a better idea of federal money. And some of that federal money may flow directly through to cities and towns. Some of it may flow through to different specific, like let's say EOPS that deals with public safety, National Guard issues. It may flow through public health. There's a bunch of different areas that it may flow through either directly or through the state that can pass through. Some of it may be reimbursing identified expenditures. So obviously, I'm sure your finance team is trying to track everything that was things that otherwise would not have been spent but for dealing with the pandemic and trying to identify those. I know the state is.
Exactly. And the point I was just trying to make was, in an ordinary year, back in December, so this would have been last December, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the Baker administration, come together, have a process where they hear from economists and other experts. And that's all about trying to figure out how much revenue the state can expect in the next fiscal year in order to build its budget. And that's the way it always works. And the fact that we had to essentially throw that all out, because everything's up in the air now and there's so much uncertainty, we're in a new world. We basically had to restart that process on April 14th, which is unprecedented. So that was the point I was trying to get across, is this is really not something we've seen before, that we had to sort of tear up the work that had been done over the last 4 months to start building a state budget for the new fiscal year, which begins July 1st. And we had to restart that process, mid-April. And now we're working to try to figure out, again, what can the state expect in revenues, sales tax, income tax, and so on. And then we'll be able to build a state budget and determine, again, how much local aid and Chapter 70, and all the other, important services and programs that we need to fund. So that's what I was trying to explain.
The only exclamation point I would add on to that, Jason, is we're also, unlike, let's say, a natural disaster, a big snowstorm where you feel like there's a defined beginning and a defined end.
Right.
There's no end, there's no period on this problem yet. So it makes it very hard, or that much harder, to kind of identify or quantify the magnitude of the problem. And then obviously the speculation about, well, if you come out too soon, do you have a reoccurrence? Is there a reoccurrence in the fall? What are the things that you need to do to avoid those? So unfortunately, we're not going to have that clearly defined endpoint, as well as an endpoint that doesn't probably mean that everything, the new normal is different than the old normal.
Yep, that's a really important point.
Vanessa, go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Jason, Rich, Brad, I just want to thank you for being here. It is helpful to hear directly from you. My question is, one of the things I raised early on with our town manager is that the biggest expense that residents have that goes to the town is our property taxes. And would it be possible for the town to create some kind of deferment of payments for those that are find themselves unemployed and struggling to make those payments. And what I learned is that there are significant limitations on what the town can individually do, that much of that is structured by the state or dictated by the state. Are any efforts being made to allow towns to create their own programs or to broaden what exceptions might be for programs for delaying property taxes?
I personally will have to take a look at it, Vanessa. I don't know of anything off the top of my head other than, we sort of kind of delayed paying the taxes and this and that. But obviously, we would probably have to look at some kind of a program, sort of like, Reading's tax deferral that might be customized to Reading, or maybe something that's a little more a la carte that you pick and do certain things. But obviously, it creates potentially a cash flow situation on the municipal level, depending on how aggressive or generous a community is with that. Obviously, as Jason touched on earlier, we did an evictions and foreclosures piece, and hopefully, obviously that may not relate into property taxes, but the idea being that, it is certainly worth looking at. But to the extent that's a program that requires a state to say, we'll provide upfront money so you can provide that relief, the state's ability to sort of embark on new areas of cost is going to be beyond limited. I do think there's some merit to penny. I mean, obviously you guys have a reserve. I had this conversation earlier that in terms of doing your own municipal budgeting, people who can't pay their property tax bill, and I think there's usually an amount of reserve for overlay and abatement and whatever the account was. As I recall, there's some sort of built in, okay, some people aren't going to pay. That may be a number that you carry at a higher number, which doesn't help you budgeting wise, but does recognize there's going to be some increased number in the community that are going to struggle. But I think it's worth, and we'll take a look and see if there's something out there, either in DC underway in Massachusetts, or maybe that some other state has come up with. And certainly, if you find something, please feel free to send it along.
Yeah, I would just add, this is a really important point, to find different ways to give relief to our residents, given the very tough times they're going through. I just wanted to remind folks, the municipal legislation that the state passed, Governor Baker signed maybe now 3 weeks ago or so, did give towns the ability to at least push back would it be the Q2, I guess. It would be it was the May 1st due date for property taxes, to push that back under local option, and also to waive any penalties or interest if somebody did pay late. So we did actually include some relief in that bill, and I believe Reading, you adopted that, right? Local option. Yeah. But I know you're asking about going beyond that, and we will take that back. That's good feedback. See if there's any options.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions from the board? Not seeing any. I don't see any public questions at the moment either. If the public has any questions they'd like to share, please send them in by email now.
Mr. Chairman, just as a moment, just a shout out to the first responders in Reading. I know you had a terrible fire at Meadowbrook, and it's a tragedy, but it was incredible to see the amount of mutual aid that arrived on scene, and Chief Clark, because I didn't want to interrupt, Chief Burns was kind enough and to see, the communities I represent all there, but far beyond that, responding to that situation, and obviously a terrible situation for Reading and Meadowbrook. Fortunately, no injuries or loss of life, but I think that was symbolic of the coming together in difficult times that we see on a routine basis through the communities I represent throughout the Commonwealth. But I think it was, I just wanted to mention and say thanks for a job well done.
Thanks, Brad.
I do just want to add a couple of things. So, I think it's very helpful for us to hear from everybody within town government about some of your concerns and whatnot as pieces of legislation. I mean, right now they're moving pretty quick, but as we, as an example, vote by mail, where people are at on that, and what does that look like for Reading? What are some of your concerns specifically about what that would look like and how that would be managed? So somebody like the town clerk talking with us about that and expressing that to us is important. And if there's other tools that you think you need in your toolbox that we're not thinking of, let us know about that. Reach out, communicate, and we'll do whatever we can to try to make sure that you've got what you need in order to get through this. I think that, a lot of folks have used the term, kind of everything's on the table right now. So this is an opportunity to kind of throw some things against the wall and say, hey, let's see if this can work right now. Is this something that's a good idea that could work for Reading or perhaps other municipalities as well? So just keep that communication flowing and keep us posted.
Will do. I guess, so thanks to the three of you for coming tonight, but even more broadly for working together so well for the town of Reading. We really appreciate that. We most certainly have some needs, and we will not be shy in sharing them with you, but I think we've given you a flavor of some of them now. And even though times are very uncertain, and we appreciate other communities are facing the same things, we all need to work through this together. So we appreciate staying in close touch with you folks. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
You are more than welcome to stay for as long as you choose in the meeting, but we appreciate you have other communities that you represent and need to take care of as well. So we thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next on our list, I think we'll go to the COVID-19 update from Board of Health. So Emmy, would you like to take over from here?
Sure. So I'll start by giving an update on our current numbers in Reading. So currently our cumulative cases is 219. Of those, 142 are active, 67 have recovered, and there have been 10 deaths. I did want to mention that the state actually allows long-term care facilities and assisted living facilities to request partial or full facility testing once. 2 facilities in Reading have done that, and that has accounted for some of the jumps in numbers that we've seen over the last couple of weeks for those of you who have been watching the numbers. I also want to note that the actual number of cases, this has been stated before, but the actual number of cases in the general population is likely much higher than what is reported due to mild or no symptoms and lack of access to testing. So I think, as most people are aware now, the major action we took recently was to put in place an order requiring face coverings in public buildings. This order was based on CDC and state guidance. The CDC guidance came on April 3rd, and the state guidance followed shortly thereafter. This was based on the likelihood of asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic transmission. It's very difficult to assess how significant asymptomatic transmission is because we aren't testing asymptomatic individuals. Right now, we are seeing them in the long-term care facilities and the assisted living facilities, at least asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. So there's a chance that there will be data coming out of that, actually. Why did we make the decision to take it from an advisory to an order? Data. So I have been working for the last 20 years in infectious disease research. This is my wheelhouse. I've been spending a lot of time looking through data and publications. And what I've noticed is that there's been mounting evidence over the last 2 weeks that suggests pre-symptomatic transmission may be a significant driver in the spread of disease. We've seen this in papers in Nature Medicine. There was an article recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, among others. And there was a recent report out of Brigham and Women's Hospital where they changed their policy to have hospital staff, almost all hospital staff, wear masks, regardless of whether they were having direct contact with patients, and they noticed a 50% drop in hospital transmission. I do want to say that wearing a face covering should not replace social distancing and hand washing. You should still keep up with that. That's very important. We do want restrictions lifted as soon as possible. We want businesses back up and running as soon as we can and for as long as we can. We can't control the testing and hospital capacities, but one thing we can do is really try and limit transmission, and this seems like a reasonable step. I do want to note that we have a medical exemption in our order. There are individuals who, for medical reasons, cannot wear a face covering. They have a pre-existing respiratory condition, for example. You can't tell if somebody, what somebody's medical background is just from looking at them. So we urge the public not to attempt to enforce this policy, this order themselves. Don't get into confrontations. If you have a concern or a complaint, please contact our health agent, Laura Vlasic. That includes if you find that businesses aren't posting signage. She can be contacted through the town website or at 781-942-6653. Sorry, 6653. A health agent and our health inspector are going to each open food establishment to verify compliance. But I do want to note also that our health agent has been getting a surge in health complaints, including those not related to COVID, actually. So she's trying to juggle both the health complaints, which we typically like to prioritize, as well as these more regular visits to food establishments. I also want to note that many other communities have similar orders in place or in the works, and they may have different or even more severe enforcement policies. I know some of them have fines up to $1,000. So communities that do have orders in place at the moment include, but are not limited to, North Reading, Wakefield, Peabody, Middleton, Swampscott, Salem, Beverly, Needham, Brookline, Cambridge, and Somerville. So if you're going to one of those towns, you may want to apprise yourself of their orders anyway. I have two more notes not related to the face coverings. One is that we anticipate and hope that our flu clinics will be popular once again this year. It's really important that people get their flu vaccine this year. Our health agent is already preparing for those flu clinics. We're obviously going to go take some steps to make sure they're as safe as possible. And she has placed her first vaccine order already. And one other note is that the Board of Health will likely be discussing soon the possibility of allowing food establishments to serve as grocers while dine-in restrictions are in place. This was an idea brought to us by board member Kevin Sexton. He had seen another community doing this, and Laura was in agreement that some establishments might likely be interested in having this avenue open. And that is it.
Great. Thanks, Emmy. Board members, any questions for Emmy?
Emmy, I had a couple questions relative to the mask order. Just wanted to clarify that children under the age of 2 should not be wearing masks.
Correct.
And I think I had read somewhere that it could be enforced by way of a fine pursuant to Board of Health policies. And I wondered what that looks like. Would that be something that would be administered by the health agent, and what denomination?
Yeah, so that would be by the health agent, and it's let me look them up, but it's in the bylaws, the Board of Health regulations. I think it's $50 for a first violation, $100 for a second, and $150 for a third. But I can verify that.
Thank you.
Carlo.
Hi, Emmy. You
Yeah.
You included, well, when it was posted and then amended, and you included the flyer for the language to post in a window on the door. How much time are you giving, or what kind of bandwidth does the department have to check the apartment buildings, check the numerous businesses we have in town, and never mind the big box? Maybe they've done it already, but I know when this was posted over the weekend and then updated, I know social media is not the end-all be-all, but there was a lot of discussion about, it came out of nowhere, even though it didn't, but the notice of well, this is what we have to do now, and more so for the public entering a business. They might be pumping gas outside and then go into the store and, not have their mask with them. And so I don't know how much time you're giving to the businesses, or has it been immediate?
Yeah, no, we're allowing some time. We recognize that some businesses didn't get the notice right away. In fact, there are some businesses that the notice actually goes to a corporate office before it goes to the local office, so to the local store. So right now, the health agent is going around anyone and the inspector, anyone who doesn't have the posted sign is given a sign to post, and they're given the order, and they explain the order to the business owners. So yeah, we're not enforcing on the first go round. So
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because I think the general public at large, and I don't know how many are watching tonight, and not everyone's on social media, but what other ways of your messaging are you getting out there? Are there direct letters going out? Is it just visits? What other forms of communication? I know we've got a reverse 911 the other day, which is very helpful. Is there going to be another one in a week? And just some guidance there. So you keep on reinforcing it so the public knows.
So there was a number of avenues of getting the information out. In fact, I think Jean Delios has a list of all the different ways and all the different groups we got the information out to. I don't know if she wants to jump in, but okay, thanks.
So the list that I've been keeping is sort of community updates as well as targeted updates. So the first one was when the Board of Health announced last Wednesday at the Select Board meeting about the facial covering policy. Then that followed by a blast that went out to the members of the Reading North Reading Chamber. That was an email that was sent on the following day, which was April 23rd. On Monday, April 27th, there was an email blast to all of the establishments with a food permit, and that was sent by the health agent. And as was noted, the inspection team is continuing to do their work in the food establishments, and that will include the facial covering policy. Then the next day on April 28th, I sent out a email to every permitted construction site about the facial covering policy. Likewise, an email went out from my end to multifamily residences about the facial covering policy, and that was again on April 28th. And that includes apartments, condominiums, senior housing, and subsidized housing. Then Reading Patch had a coverage on April 28th, and Fire is working very closely with us on some larger construction sites. They're doing site visits and inspection checks for COVID-19 compliance. So we feel that that is another very important component, and it's important that we're all collaboratively getting together to work the details of this, and Fire's been enormously helpful, so thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, me again. I know a few weeks ago we spoke with, I don't know if it was you, Emmy, or Kevin, or who it was, about preemptive work to businesses that are closed. So to not delay them to get open. Has any of that been done yet? So anyone who wants to open, I'll give you an example, is Biltmore, Maine, which has been closed for several weeks. And they say, okay, we want to reopen when the state, when Governor Baker says it's okay to open. Is the Board of Health have the bandwidth to, or the salons, or anyone that needs to be inspected? Because we did speak about this a few weeks ago, to kind of get ahead of it, so we don't delay any business owner that wants to open. So has anything been done or discussed about that?
So, Jean actually probably has good information for this as well. But yes, there is a plan, a plan in place to prioritize businesses. So they've broken the businesses up into a list of those that are currently open and those that are currently closed. And the ones that are currently open are going to get routine inspections now, so that efforts can be focused on the closed businesses when it comes time to, when we know that they can open, right? So we can get straight out to those businesses, and the open businesses can take a back seat because they'll have already been inspected. Is that fair enough to say, Jean? Okay.
I spent a fair amount of time with the health agent and with Deputy Chief Jackson on Monday, just again going over this through command, so that we all had the same understanding. And we are focusing on what we're calling COVID checks as the top priority. And so all of the work that's being done collaboratively with fire and health is making sure that safety and compliance with COVID-19 protocols is number one. And the establishments are being visited routinely, 5 and 6 a day, to make sure that's in place and being observed. And now with the facial covering policy, that will be part of that. Second priority is getting our plan in place for businesses that are sort of in a pending mode to get reopened, and whatever we can do to do some preliminary work with them now, or just be queued up and ready to go when we get the green light that they can open. We're working through that. And then the third priority is, again, to circle back to the establishments that are open, because they're open and they're operating, and seemingly we haven't had any complaints. So we feel pretty confident that they're working well, and we'll get to them in that order. But we do feel confident that we have a plan and we have the capacity. And now with some additional time extended, unfortunately, it's not great for everyone, but from a planning point of view, it gives us that much more time to execute.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just add, without stealing from Chief Burns' thunder coming up, there are a lot of priorities that the command team is dealing with, and this is actually one of them. So it's very much on the radar. Other questions from the board? Karen.
Quick question. I know Bob mentioned last week there were some masks on order. I was wondering if they have come in at this point or still waiting.
Some have come in, Bob. I don't know. I don't have a lot of details on the mask.
Yeah, Greg, this is on the agenda for a couple of topics later. Greg will give a full update.
Thanks.
Other questions from the board? No. All right. So let's kind of continue through command. Bob, you had suggested maybe John would be next. Is that still the plan? Great. So Dr. Doherty, give it to you, please.
Great, thank you. And Mrs. Dowd is going to contribute to this part of the report also. So first of all, I want to echo what several of others have said about public safety and all the work that they're doing in our nurses. I also want to give a shout out to some other unsung heroes that have been in our, been coming to work pretty much every day and either working collaboratively with the town or have been on school sites doing all kinds of different types of work to keep our buildings moving forward and our student needs moving forward. So that includes our facility staff, our custodians, food service technicians, and our nurses who have been working closely with the public health department. So I want to thank them as well. I also want to thank our teachers and our administrators for the incredible amount of work that they have been doing in this challenging time with remote learning. And tomorrow night, at our school committee meeting, I'll be going into a lot more detail about the types of activities that are going on right now in our schools. Essentially, in the 6 weeks that we have been out, and it seems more than 6 weeks, but it has been 6 weeks, we've really been through 3 phases. In phase 1, we prioritize student and staff safety, nutrition, and other foundational needs. That really was the first week to 10 days. Then, as we received more guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we went into phase 2, which is where we were establishing all of our remote learning platform, and started developing activities and having our teachers connect with students online. And now we're entering phase 3, with knowing that school is going to be closed for the rest of the year. Phase 3, and again, using guidance from the state, it's how do we continue that learning? How do we deepen that learning? And how do we build that platform so there's more what's called live learning going on, or synchronous learning going on between teachers and students. So that's what we're in the process of doing right now. We're working very closely with the teachers and administrators to make that happen. We are now focused on a lot of other things. Mrs. Dowd will go into some detail on some of those, but certainly what's in everyone's mind is graduation. What's that going to look like? I know Mrs. Boynton, our high school principal, is working closely with her counterparts in the Middlesex League to try to put together the best possible graduation and graduation activities for our class of 2020. We're also taking a look at what is summer programming going to look like, particularly our students with disabilities. And what is school going to look like in next September? These are all certainly questions that we have, but these are things that we have begun the planning process for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Mrs. Dowd, and she's going to
interrupt just for a moment. I understand that there may be an issue on the live feed on RCTV at the moment. It's still up and live on YouTube, and Phil Rushworth is working on it on RCTV right now. Excuse me for interrupting.
No problem. Thank you. I'm just going to give a very quick update, and I do apologize because I think Chief Burns is probably going to go into slightly more detail on some of it, but the schools have been working very closely with the command group as well as the Board of Health to make sure that we're following all of their guidelines and updates very closely. We have taken it, the notices that did come out, we actually did post all of the face covering notices, facial covering in all of our schools, mainly because we do still, with our lunch distribution and technology distribution, we do have people still entering the building. So we wanted to make sure that we're following all of the safety precautions. So we have posted all of that. We're also working very closely with them. As folks know, school ended rather abruptly on March 13th when we received the notice that got extended, then it got extended, then finally got extended through the end of the year. So unfortunately with that, we did not have a chance to fully close out the way we normally would. So we are working closely with command and planning to make sure we have a process in place. We have to bring food services folks back in to properly close out the kitchens, to make sure everything is closed out correctly, food is disposed of properly to the extent it needs to be, as well as to make sure all of the equipment and the freezers and everything are properly shut down. We also are going to be working, which we'll be giving updates tomorrow, so it's a little bit precursor for school committee. We also were not able to properly have all of the teachers close out their rooms. As most of you know, there is a process where they need to come in, pack up. Teachers move classrooms year to year. We also, students were not able to completely close out lockers and their desks. So we're working very closely to come up with a plan to allow that to happen in the safest possible way. So we're working on drafts of that now that we'll be sharing with the command group and Board of Health to make sure everyone's in agreement. We're also, similar to what the town is doing, coming up with plans to have staff come back into the buildings once the restrictions are lifted, so that we have a good process to allow that to happen in an organized manner. Our food distributions are continuing as we had anticipated. We have started to see increases in the number of families we are supporting. We continue to work very closely with Kevin Bowmiller and his team. They've been great to work with. Our food services director, Danielle Collins, has been fantastic. She is in touch with the state on a daily basis, making sure we're able to get our commodity deliveries. We're also looking at what we need to do, knowing the school year is ending, to make sure that we have a plan in place between ourselves and the town to continue to support the families. And we're also looking into what potentially this looks like in the fall if schools do not open on time. So we're working very closely to make sure the families maintain support that we've been able to give them. And those are pretty much the most significant. Technology we're still distributing, but I think we've addressed the majority of that. Right now, it's really making sure the grab and go meals are continuing to happen. We did make sure the food services group has all of the notifications that came out. They're also, as part of the meals that we're preparing, we did put the face covering notice in all the packages we distributed this week to make sure that the families were aware of all the precautions we were taking and that we were following the town guidelines as well.
Great. Thanks, Gail. Two quick comments, if I could. One, RCTV is back. And second is, Emmy, there's a question directed to you, if I could read that one, please. This is from Krista Rubin on Fairchild Drive. Thank you to each member of the Board of Health for all of the phenomenal work you have undertaken to keep us all safe. Would you consider placing signage with pictures or pictographs at various locations showing the proper way to wear a mask, cover mouth and nose? I see many people wearing them incorrectly, compromising the protection. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point. I know that when the health agent has been going out, she's been directing the businesses to the proper use of the masks. I think our Vice Chair, Eleanor Shonkoff, is working on some educational information, so this would be right in line with that. So yes, great suggestion.
Next on the list, I think, to Bob for town department updates.
Thank you, Mark. If you don't mind pulling up the two slides I sent you rather earlier.
Yep, sorry, give me 1 second to.
I'll talk. I'll kill time. Much as the schools were planning for a safe reopening, as it were, it's now been extended by the governor to at least May 18th. Until such time as when that executive order is lifted, we're following Board of Health guidance for social distancing. Employees are coming to work, but working at safe distances from each other. Different policies and procedures have changed. For instance, police now have a rotation of vehicles so that if anyone was to become sick, it's easy to trace back. DPW is one person per maximum in the vehicle. And our town departments last week sat down and spent a lot of time, again, doing a phased reopening. And here's some work that the facilities department has done at the town clerk's window, for instance. You can see a shield. It's got space at the bottom so that people can exchange documents back and forth. It's much like you've seen at many other businesses to protect both the customer and the employee from exchanging virus germs. So all of our customer service windows, this is one downstairs in DPW engineering, the blue tape's not off yet. But a key feature is there's still an ability to share a plan or a large document by sliding it underneath. So that the full service should still be in place, but this is just additional safety measures. And I have to give our facilities department a lot of credit. They went out and purchased some material, and they're doing all this work themselves at a time when other towns are just realizing they might have to think about it, and prices are getting expensive. So we're prepared to have a reopening. We understand the idea of a phased reopening. It really depends on the state and what their time frame is. We really don't know. We do know that on May 18th, it will not be a full return to full opening for anyone. So we're expecting this to go on for some time. There are a few services that were discontinued or changed that are forecast to go back into place. The simplest example is the town clerk stopped taking marriage intentions until they're by appointment only, as opposed to just walking in and expressing an interest. So again, the town departments, will be ready to phase open as needed. It goes without saying, public safety is already working over 100%. They won't be phasing anything opening. But that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Next, I think Greg, update status of Reading facilities with high elderly population.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we've been doing is 2 to 3 times a week, we've been going around and visiting the facilities with high elderly population for a couple of reasons. One, we want to see how they're doing. We want to see how their residents are doing. And we also want to see if they have enough protective equipment. Very early on, when this first broke in mid-March, there was a real scarcity of particularly masks. And some of our facilities didn't have enough masks. So we were able to, through MEMA, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, get them masks and distributed them to them. Also gowns and other protective equipment. The elderly facilities are doing well. The staff is doing very well. We're pleased by how they're responding to it. Some of the facilities, have their hands full managing it, but they're doing very well. So these facilities are at the highest risk. That's where most of the sickness is, and unfortunately, most of the deaths. So it's something that we're concerned about, and we're going to continue to follow until this is over.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Do board members, if you have questions at any point, please go ahead. Karen, it looks like you have a question. Sorry. I anticipated too early. Sorry about that.
Mark, one thing to add, we've given out to these facilities over 700 pieces of protective equipment to the elderly facilities in town. In addition to that doesn't count what we've given to the police, DPW, and other facilities.
Great, thanks. Bob, before you and John talk a little bit about summer, do you want me to share the slide of goals and activities? Is now a good time for that?
Sure. Great idea.
Give me just 1 second to maneuver it onto the screen. There you go. So, Greg, I want to let you talk about all the things that you have been engaged with in leading the community response here.
Well, first, that's not me. This is something that we've all been working on. Every town department, school department has been instrumental with this. John Doherty, Gail Gowd, the police department, public services, the DPW, all the town departments have worked towards this. This is something I just kind of threw together this afternoon. We've been right in the middle of this for several weeks right now. And because we're in the moment, we're trying to prepare for what we think is coming, but we're not sure. And as things change, I just want to take a minute and jot down the accomplishments that were accomplished together with all the departments working hand in hand. And I think I probably missed about 30–40% of them. And I know if the schools added all of their stuff on this would keep going and going and going. But it gives you a little bit of an insight to what we've been working on to make sure the residents are safe, the employees are safe, that businesses, once we get approval from the governor's office and the Board of Public Health, can open safely, and also so the residents can recover. So that's what this is all geared to. I don't know if you wanted me to read all of this. It's a lot, but there's been a tremendous amount accomplished in the last several weeks. And if you're not part of it, you may not know that these things were in place and happening.
I think it's great. I think more important is to kind of see the size of this and the fact that, as you mentioned, that there may be another 30 or 40% that aren't even here. It's quite a list of accomplishments.
Oh, there definitely is things that are missing. Because after I sent it to the town manager, I thought of 3 or 4 other things to add to it. So, and it's all about preparing the residents, making sure they're safe, making sure the employees are safe, and making sure that we're ready to open up when that happens. Because we don't want an order to open and then to delay a business from opening because we can't get that inspection done.
Exactly. Great. John and Bob, school and summer recreation programs.
Sure, I'll start. I also just want to make a quick comment on Greg's list that usually in emergency management, we have an incident of far less duration. So there's a time to reflect on the incident, usually within a few days after it ends. The governor put it well at a press conference today when someone asked him if he has any time to relax or wind down. He said, absolutely not. This is a 24-hour job for the foreseeable future. And the same is true here, but it's really important that we reflect on things we've done well, things that we could improve on, and not just hurtle head first into the future. So it's really helpful when Greg sits down and puts a list together. We talked about having a reopening plan probably faster than others started to think about it. The planning component of this is really important, and we also need to learn kind of from what we're doing. The summer issue is something that I've asked our state delegation, who's done a great job on almost everything else, to try to get us some state guidance on the summer. I think it would be difficult for individual communities to take actions, although some are starting to. I learned 2 days ago that the state is unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely to say anything until that May 18th deadline on whether to hold summer programs or whether to cancel summer programs or what circumstances they could be held under. There was a very large rec director phone call today across the state. Everyone's wrestling with the same kind of issue, trying to imagine how to open and run safe programs. And quite honestly, from my perspective, I just don't see how it's possible for most programs. The advantage is you're outside. That's a tremendous advantage. The disadvantage is it's a lot of people usually packed in a lot of space. There's not a lot of summer activities that have 6-foot distances between people. So Reading will remain as flexible as we can. We'll try to balance the need for residents to have a decision from us. But most importantly, it's the safety of especially the kids that are forefront. And we'll see if we can wait till May 18th to make a decision. We'll do our best to do that. Hopefully the state can speed it up a little, or perhaps give us some guidance on what type of activities would be okay. But again, I have to say, from my perspective, if I had to decide today, I would say we're closed for the summer. And then perhaps some activities could be opened if they could be done safely. I know John and I have spent some time talking about this and talking about the fall semester for schools. Our facilities department has set up mock classrooms with social distancing, and it's not a pretty sight. I don't know, you get maybe 6 or 8 kids in a classroom. And I know there's been discussion about going to staggered shifts for students and for teachers and for classes. So, we want to over-prepare and over-plan for this, I guess, because we just don't know what future directions are. And certainly the town and the schools would like to make the same decision in terms of summer activities. So at this point, John, if you want to jump in.
Sure. A lot what Bob said, I echo. Obviously, in the decisions that we're making this summer, it's really going to be based on student and staff safety. What is an increasing challenge for us, though, is that we will have to provide some sort of programming for our students with disabilities. So we're currently planning right now two different paths. One path is if we are going to have extended year programming for students with disabilities on site at a school. The other option is to provide a remote learning environment, which is obviously a lot more challenging for students with disabilities. So those are the two avenues that we're looking at right now. In addition to that, obviously there's the schools, there's always a lot going on in the schools, but our extended year program, our extended year program with after school programming with students that we have during the summer, and our summer school program is also something that we need to look at. But we're going to also work very closely with the town and make similar decisions that would be made with recreation. But the big one right now is how do we deliver the services in our extended years services for those students with disabilities.
Thanks, John. Karen, you had a question.
My heart goes out to all the families and children affected by this, and I understand the complexities affecting their families. Just to, before we get off this topic, I just wanted to follow up, as this is an ongoing situation. Are we getting the masks in that we ordered? And probably this is for Greg.
If you hang on about 30 seconds, Karen, that's the next item literally on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions so far? Keep rolling. Okay, Greg, please, could you address that question?
Sure. So we have gotten part of the shipments that have been ordered. We're still waiting. And up until just a couple of days ago, we weren't sure. We were waiting for a somewhat larger shipment. We weren't quite sure if we were going to get them or not. But we did. And so what we've been doing today is putting a plan in place to distribute masks to residents. We couldn't do it last week because we didn't have them and didn't know when they were going to come in. And we have to make sure that we're protecting our employees because we have people that are responding to calls where people are infected. So we have to make sure that we have enough for all our people that have to work out in the street. So we did develop a plan with the assistance of the police department and the school department and public services and library staff. We have a plan to distribute masks to the residents, and tentatively it's for Wednesday, May 6th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So we've carved out several thousand masks to give away to the residents. And because there is such short supply, we want to make sure that they go to the residents of the most vulnerable. So we're looking at distributing them to residents who are 60 and older, and for those who may have medical issues. So that's our target. We're going to have about 8,000 masks to distribute. We'll save a supply for our elderly facilities in the community, and we'll distribute those ourselves to them for those people that can't get out. The process will be they'll drive into the field house and remain in their cars, and we'll distribute those masks to them. So we're pretty far along on it, and I'm confident that the event will be successful. We're also incorporating volunteers. We've had a lot of people that volunteered to assist us in responding to the COVID-19 crisis, so we're going to use some volunteers in this effort as well.
That's great.
Can I just jump in? Real quick?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and just say shout out to our health agent, Laura Vlasic, because it's hard to get masks, and she had a contact who did end up coming through. So shout out to her. Thank you.
That's right. Yes. And that was instrumental because that was a big shipment for us, several thousand. And without that, this just wouldn't have happened. So thank you, Emmy. Yes.
Fabulous. Next is discussion of community events. Greg, do you want to update that one as well, please?
I thought Bob was going to update it. Bob has better information on the Memorial Day observances and Friends and Family Day.
Sure, I can do that. Also, on the mask distribution, there will be a code red announcement going out either Thursday or Friday, and then another one on Monday as a reminder. There will also be plenty of literature available to publicize the event. And there will be some sort of a leaflet or flyer handed out to people as they arrive. Just again, pointing at resources and other things that they may want to know. And just to emphasize Greg's point, this is meant to be a directed effort at the most needy people in town, the demographically neediest. Our volunteers have created a lot of homegrown, home knitted masks that have met the demand. Every single person that has asked the town for a mask as of this morning has one or has had the need met. But this effort will go well above and beyond the people that have asked. We know there's people that aren't asking us. But it's important that only people that really need these masks show up, because we just don't want to run out. We don't know when we can have a second event because the supply chain is so erratic right now. In terms of community events, the Friends and Family Day in June is officially canceled. Memorial Day services will not take place in cemeteries. There's still a plan ongoing to have a very, very small gathering, and by that I mean maybe 4 or 5 of us out in the common or perhaps right in front of Town Hall, and to have an honor of the day, in honor of the veterans in that way. It's a very different year this year. Our veterans agent, Kevin Bowmiller, is certainly something near and dear to his heart, and as he said to you last week, the veterans will not be forgotten. It will be different this year. This is an issue, again, we really haven't had any advice from the state, other than, by extending to May 18th, the date of, it's likely to still be a 10-person or less gathering. So gathering in the cemeteries is really just out of the question at this point. I've been in touch with 2 folks related to the Fall Street Fair. No decision has been made on that yet. That's an early September event. My guess is they will have to decide in the next 30 or 45 days because, as many of you know, there's a lot of advanced planning there. I have no real sense of where that will go. And those are the 3 big sort of community events on the horizon. If any of you can think of other gatherings that would be large, please let us know and we'll work on those. Graduation clearly would be one, and John is working on that.
Thanks. Just quick comment for Greg and for Emmy. The point that was made earlier by Krista Rubin about literature and how to properly wear and use a mask, might it be possible to distribute that with the masks?
Yes, we're working on that now. And so mask care is part of it, when it needs to be thrown out, things like that. And I hope to include the other aspect in wearing it properly as well. So we're in the process of including that.
Great, thank you. Next on the list is financial health. Bob and John, have you listed here?
You saw from our legislators that that's the issue they spent the most time on. It's not something we've talked about a lot in Reading, but it's certainly something that we've worked a lot on. May 12th, there will be a finance committee meeting to discuss altering the FY21 budget. John and Gail and I, as well as Sharon and Andre at Town Hall, have looked at revenues, looked at expenses. It's really too soon to publicly say much, but I will say the magnitude of the cut is not nearly what you've seen in other cities or other states. Prop 2.5 giveth and taketh away. Prop 2.5 never let us spend much money. So now, having a 2.5% guaranteed stream of income, albeit perhaps cash flow uncertainty, is a tremendous benefit for towns in Massachusetts. we will not be looking at 15% reductions of our revenues like the state is looking at, because so much of our revenues in Reading are property taxes. Again, people may pay slowly, and we'll have to accommodate for the cash flow, but budget cuts will not be as severe as you'll read in the papers from other states and other cities and towns across the country, frankly, because they've had 7 and 10% increases annually for many years, and we never did that. So the good news is the cuts will be relatively low. The bad news is that this will, in aggregate, undo a big percent of what the override was. Not to say we're going to cut all those services by any means. I think the biggest challenge for John and I, as was referenced, I think, by Representative Jones, is for how long? What does this look like? It's a relatively straightforward exercise to cut a budget for next year. What about the year after? What about the year after that? What are the assumptions? What is state aid going to look like in years 2 and 3? Those are very hard questions right now. If we knew for sure what the next 3 to 5 years had in store, I think John and I would have a much clearer picture about what we should do. But since we don't, or at least I'll speak for myself, I don't want to disassemble the organization and then find out in a year or two, gee, things got better pretty fast. We didn't really have to do that. Reading, again, is in an extremely fortunate position in having a very large balance of reserves. We could have town meeting pass the exact same budget that's in front of it and have no worries at all from a financial standpoint. It just seems very imprudent to do that, and very honestly, very disrespectful. So we will be making cuts. There'll be at both the school and the town. We'll be asking FinCom to use a little bit more reserves. We'll try to do some things, which is a little harder for John, that can be restored during the year if things get better. So capital comes right to mind. If all of a sudden in next October, November, our picture is better, it's easy to spend capital at a November town meeting or even an April town meeting. For the schools especially, it's impossible to hire teachers in the middle of a year. You just don't do that. So I think we've given it a lot of thought. I think we, much as the representatives and senators said, we're being extremely conservative and probably assuming hopefully worse than what happens. When they asked me what they should bring into their discussions, I said the same thing to them, which is don't assume anything that's positive. Assume the worst. Assume about as bad as you can imagine, because what would not help the schools in the town especially is mid-year cuts when they don't guess right next year and they don't have a rainy day fund that's big enough. We have seen that twice in my tenure where there's been mid-year 9C cuts. And if it happens halfway through the year, you have to cut twice as much halfway through the year to take care of that revenue shortfall. So I've also urged them, please give it to us straight. Don't sugarcoat it. So again, we are expecting a large decrease in local revenues, but not nearly on the order of what the state, will see as a percent. And again, we do have a good rainy day fund ourselves. The careful budgeting and careful spending we've all done for the last few years, notwithstanding an override, has really now would put us in a better position than many. John?
The only other piece I want to add is I think this is where the open communication that we have between town and schools is even more important. We've already had, Bob and I and Gail have been talking about this probably for 2 to 3 weeks now, of what this would, what could this look like? So we've been planning this. We have a few additional challenges outside of the revenue piece. Obviously, there's going to be some costs associated with the remote learning moving forward if that continues. There may be some additional special education costs. So those are the types of things that we have to take a look at now. It's almost like there are certain aspects of our budget that we need to rethink along with the revenue piece that Bob mentioned.
Yesterday, I circulated town budget draft cuts to department heads. And they're not all cuts. Some are additions, some are changes. We clearly have some COVID-19 related expenses that we know are there, and it would be dishonest or disingenuous to ignore them. But order of magnitude, we have already spent or committed about $200,000 just for COVID on the town side. And I know the schools have a figure, and that's expenses, that's not wages. I'm sure we will not fully budget the costs of COVID-19, no matter what we do, because we just can't know. So again, our cash reserves will come in quite handy next year if we have, any large number. I know the schools, depending on what course of action they take for the next year, as John mentioned, there's going to be some new and possibly very large costs related to COVID-19 that we just can't know today and may not know until August. So it will be a different budget. We're hoping very much that it can be presented succinctly to FinCom on May 12th, and hopefully they'll agree with the approach. And then, hopefully again on June 15th, we can just dispense of the budget and a couple of other small housekeeping issues related to that with a one-day town meeting. I've been in touch with our other area managers and our delegation, and a 1/12 budget in July is absolutely a last resort. It is not something that anyone wants to do. It's something that has to be a real emergency that you just couldn't have foreseen. And right now, we have a lot of advanced time to plan. So I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to meet in some fashion, remotely or otherwise, in June, have a town meeting and have a budget passed. And it's, we're doing it at a time, all levels of government are serving the constituents and suffering losses. It's not quite the same as many businesses that are suffering significant losses, but they're home not doing much. They don't have a business to run. The travel business doesn't exist. Very difficult if you work in that field, but at least you're not also being asked to be at work and provide 110% of the service that you were previously doing. So that's the fine line that John and I want to walk, is the service that we're providing is going to be assumed and needed. And again, we don't want to disassemble the organizations that provide that service.
Thanks, Bob. On that point, May 12th FinCom meeting, I'm wondering how many select board members might want to participate in that meeting. I, for one, do. If three or more of us are interested, let's post. I see enough heads nodding. Let's post, please, for the select board for the May 12th FinCom meeting. Thank you, folks. I'm sorry, did I interrupt, Bob?
No, all set. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so next on the agenda, I think we will put in some public comment. What I wanted to do.
Mark, I have a couple questions, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
Before we move on. I appreciate what Dr. Doherty mentioned about the town and schools working collaboratively. And to that end, I would encourage, both Bob and John to approach this looking at the needs that exist and have those drive budgeting decisions versus what the traditional split has been. I know that when the override was set a few years back, there was an adherence to the traditional split, and I don't know where exactly the needs will derive from, but I would encourage us to move forward in a way that we're addressing the needs that arise versus trying to hold the split that's always roughly been in place.
Excellent point, yeah.
And I don't know where this would be appropriate, if now is the time to address a question that we did discuss somewhat last week with respect to food security, and Kevin Bolden-Miller spoke about the work that Human and Elder Services was doing with respect to helping residents apply for SNAP benefits and the like. And I didn't know if there was any new information from Human and Elder Services on the food security side of things. I did receive from Reverend Jamie Michaels of Old South United Methodist Church some information and update from the food pantry if you'd like me to share that at any particular time.
Please, I think timing is good. Should we first kind of address your question?
That would be great.
I don't know who the right person is or if we have the answer tonight, if we should come back. I'm kind of looking at Jean, but she can't tell because I'm looking at everybody.
I can speak to that a little bit. I did speak with Kevin Bowmiller today to get an update on where we were at with the food that's been collected at the Pleasant Street Center. And I know he spoke about that last week. It really was a really dramatic statement from the volunteer community. We're very appreciative of the Young Women's League and the Reading Lions for gathering all of that food for us. We have compiled food bags and distributed a portion of that food, but there still is food at the center and bags that can be very easily sent out. Our van driver is there every day, Monday through Friday, and as needs arise, the van driver is very happy to go out and deliver the food. So that was something that Command early on identified as being a concern, and a concern that we took very seriously, so that we were being responsive to that pocket of need in the community. And I think we've done that. In addition, the donations and the gift cards, we have a systematic way of processing and tracking those. Some go directly to the food pantry. Some we have a system for allocating them. And so I think the biggest thing in my mind that we're doing that I think is touching the community and the community of need is the daily phone calls that go out to our most fragile population, our most vulnerable. And those are continuing. Likewise, although it's not Elder Human Services, we're daily contacting the business community. As much as we're concerned about the vulnerable population of need, we're also so concerned about the business community. And Erin Schaefer, our economic development director, and myself and so many others are really boots on the ground, reaching into that business community. We're working very collaboratively with the chamber and other community partners. We're on calls every day with statewide groups so that we can be really plugged in. And if you haven't had a chance to go to the website and see the letter that gets updated routinely on that economic development, I'd encourage you to do that. There's a lot of resources. Just click here. And I think we've talked about it a little bit in the select board meeting. So I know it's a little more than what you asked for, but I think we're on it.
And you're there you go.
You did. I just realized. I said that was great. Thank you, Jean. And I know Gail spoke to this to a certain extent, and I've spoken offline with Bob about this a little bit about being able to sustain the provision of meals to students throughout the summer. And is that something from either the town or school side we'd be looking at in terms of amending budgets for FY21?
So, Bob, if you want, I can jump in, or Mark, sorry.
Please.
Went to the wrong person. So, sorry, Mark. I looked at Bob because actually Bob and I have had numerous discussions about this, because we do want to make sure from the school side, it is trying to be a rule follower. It is very heavily regulated. We are very fortunate that the food services director that we hired, she started in the fall, actually has gone through all the certification programs necessary to run a summer program, which is the first hurdle to overcome. So if there was the need to do that. We are certified to do that. She's the only person on our staff right now that is, so, but it's great because she runs the program for us as well as Wakefield. We also, which has not come out yet, she's been on the phone every day with DESE, with the state, because there are specific waivers that you need to have in order to run what they call a seamless summer program. And what that does is it allows you to not only run the program, which you have to have the waiver for a school to run the program. And the reason is because students are actually not consuming the meals on site. We're actually giving them food to take off premise. So there is guidance that's coming out that we believe will allow us to use our commodity, which is great because it gives us the pricing that has been determined through DESE and DOD for that. It would also allow us to obtain reimbursements, which is the key part to make it a sustainable program. So we believe those waivers are forthcoming. So we have been having discussions with Command and the town to look at ways to do it. And I have to thank Bob, because the first thing he said to me is, we need to do what's right. We have to know what it's going to cost, but don't let that drive the decision. We have to make sure we're doing what's right for the population. But we have received good news that we don't think it would be cost prohibitive to do it. We're also working through the mechanics, because one thing that they've said is that this would allow you to continue to run this type of program through the end of September, which we think is tied more to a federal deadline than a state deadline. So we're in the process of looking at what the needs might be, but it's been a very collaborative process, and I do thank Bob and the rest of the command structure to let us look at what it would take and not let only the cost be the driver of it.
Thank you, Gail.
Any other comments from the board? Any comments from Command that we haven't covered?
Mark, would you like me to relay what I learned relative to the food pantry?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please.
So I heard from Reverend Michaels that they have seen an increase in new clients, both folks they had not seen before and people who are coming back after an absence. But numbers physically at the pantry haven't been abnormally high. And they think that might be because a fair number of people are effectively sheltering in place and aren't going out either to the food pantry nor the grocery store. And so they're trying to organize a donation program for them. There was another group of individuals, of clients who had heard that they had closed for 2 weeks, but hadn't heard that they had reopened. But the food pantry is, in fact, reopened. And their understanding is that the greatest need right now is among families. Kids are home, they're eating more, and families are struggling. A lot of families are struggling to meet that demand. They said that they're, very grateful. There have been lots of financial donations to the pantry. So it's the greater struggle sometimes is food availability, because stores can be sold out. But they're doing the best they can. They're very grateful for the support of the community. And that is the update from the food pantry.
Thanks, Anna. Other comments or questions? Great.
Mark.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Hi, took me a moment to unmute. My questions are more for Bob, but they may be more appropriate for the upcoming FinCom meeting. So I was curious about the anticipated lost revenue, Bob. I know you already touched on that. It's a little soon to tell, but in particular as it relates to the meal tax, assuming that's going to be impacted. I'm curious how assessed values are going to be impacted, especially commercial properties. And we obviously heard from our state delegation on state funds. We also talked a couple weeks ago now about anticipated water and sewer capital projects that are on the horizon and that those may get delayed. So an update on that would also be helpful. So not seeking any answers now, but just things that are, I think, important to raise as we move forward. Thank you.
I can answer some of those now. For the meals tax, our prior assumption had been over 400,000. That's about cut in half for next year. That's assuming some kind of a soft staggered opening this summer and certainly not a return to full speed ahead until some part of the year. In terms of property valuations, again, the beauty of Prop 2.5, if you will, is that it's a levy on the tax base as a whole. The shift between commercial and residential may happen if commercial values go down, but it doesn't technically affect the income that the town receives, if you will, if people pay on time. So the property valuation will have no impact on total revenue, perhaps timing of revenue, again, if people pay slowly. And there will be some delays in capital projects, especially in water and sewer. As I mentioned to you a couple weeks ago, it was not palatable to have an increase in water and sewer or have the smallest one possible. But one of the challenges in water and sewer, because it's so much smaller than the general fund, is something that the senator mentioned earlier. You have to assume that less people are going to pay on time. In taxes, that's not a big impact. In water or sewer, it could be. We assume right now 4% of the people will pay slowly. If we just increase that to 6%, it drives up rates more than you're going to want to increase them. So we're trying to walk a fine line here of being very sensitive to the ratepayer, but being very realistic as well. So hopefully that answers many of your questions.
And I think, Bob, later in May, we're scheduled to take a look at water and sewer rates. Is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. Normally, or at least in the last several years, town meeting has appreciated it if the board votes rates before town meeting. So before June 15th is probably the best arrangement. So yeah, after the FinCom meets certainly, and before town meeting meets is ideal.
Great, thanks. Any other quick comments? Okay, let me suggest this. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Why don't we, oh, it's 8:47, of course. How about we come back at 8:55, 5 minutes to 9, we'll come back. So we'll go to recess till 8:55. I can thump for a second here. I'd like to do two things. One is I'd like to do make a comment about public comment, accept public comment, and then if the board is okay with it, let's change the order slightly. John Stempeck has been waiting very, very patiently. Let's move to the RMLD topics, and then we'll come back to the liaison topics and then finish the agenda. Is that okay with everybody? Great. Okay. All right. So let's do this. I created a slide. Let me just see if I'm able to share it. Okay, so I wanted to clarify a little bit further how we administer our public comment policy as we work with emails coming to the board. The board received some comments about how we're doing this over the last few weeks. We discussed our policies at the last meeting, and I've also consulted with town council to better understand how I believe we should handle public comments. So our select board written policy allows for public comment when people are recognized by the chair. They may then speak for the prescribed period of time, and they should avoid making disparaging comments about individuals. This is the actual policy that's in our select board policy handbook. So to best administer this through email participation, I'd like to set the following guidelines. And this is really a clarification, I think, more than anything else. We will accept public comment via email or letter where residents state their name and address. Comments will be published in our meeting packets based on when they are received. If received before the next meeting is posted, it will be included in that week's packet. If it's received after the posting, but before the following meeting is posted, it will be included in the second packet. We will establish a period of public comment toward the beginning of each meeting at the chair's discretion. Residents are invited to send in their comments, and they should correspond to a speaking time of up to 2 minutes and avoid making disparaging comments about individuals. We will read the comments in their entirety unless the comment or some portion of the comment violates the policy or applicable law. In addition, the chair may, in his or her discretion, allow for public comment during the meeting as we address items on the agenda, subject to the guidelines above. Comment is welcome on all matters of concern to citizens. If the matter is in the select board's purview, we may review it for action. If the matter is not in the board's purview, we may refer it to staff or other boards and committees as appropriate. Few other clarifying comments. Comments that are posted with the agenda can be addressed by the select board at that meeting if the requirements of the open meeting law are otherwise satisfied. Other comments may not be addressed by the board. Comments received during the meeting about agenda items can be addressed by board members at the meeting. Comments that are not about agenda items cannot be addressed as they're not part of the agenda. If we receive a large number of comments from people on any one issue, making it infeasible to read each comment without undue repetition, delay, or disruption to the meeting, we may consider summarizing the comments on an issue rather than reading each one and tally the number of people voicing a particular comment. So I worked on understanding kind of where we are and getting a good understanding from town council. And I'm hoping that this clarifies things. And where it doesn't, I would ask that people share their comments and opinions toward that end so that we can improve it. I do have one comment that came in earlier this evening. I'd like to read that one now, if that's all right. Sorry, I'm just changing my screens here for a moment. So this is from W. Bruce Cooper, 20 Covey Hill Road, Reading. The subject is suggestions for public comments during Zoom meetings. Public comment policies for virtual meetings. Virtual meeting policies for public comments should be published on the town website. For virtual meetings, policies should be stated at the start of the meeting. Email and phone mail comments should be permissible if in compliance with policies. A summary of a comment is not acceptable. Email comments should be displayed on screen and, in quotes, voiced during the meeting. Phone mail comments should be played. Email should be read by the town manager or by designated staff. If reading of emails by the town manager or designated staff is not acceptable to the board, then, quote, text-to-voice software should be used to, quote, voice the email comments. For phone mail comments, quote, voice-to-text software should be used to later publish with the emails in the board packet. Clear instructions should be stated on how to access public comments in the board packets. I was going to say, why don't we pause for a moment, see if there are any other, I have not seen any other public comments so far this evening. Has anybody else seen anything? Okay, why don't we, sorry, let me just shift gears here slightly. Let's go on to the RMLD discussions.
And Mark, my impression was we would be discussing public comment, how other communities handle it, and suggestions for future meetings at our next meeting.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a good idea. So my hope in making that statement was more to clarify, I guess, existing policy and structure. I think that what we really want to do, and we talked about at our last meeting, was to learn more about how it's being done effectively in other places, and if we can make improvements to the system that we're using. So I would agree with you. I think we should put that onto our agenda for our next meeting as an item to discuss and get some feedback. I know, and you've gotten some feedback. I've received a little bit of feedback. Other members may be getting some feedback as well.
And if that next packet could include these public comment guidelines, I haven't myself really fully digested them. I think that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. So I think what we can do, is publish them into the next packet, and it probably will make sense to publish more formally, either as they are or as we adopt going forward. Most of these were taken from kind of our existing policy and how it has been done. There were some clarifications that were made, and I know in last week's public comment, there were some questions specific to that. And that's what I tried to address with Ray, is to make sure that we understood what's required, how it should be done. Carla.
Mark, is the, thank you for putting this together. Is the bottom section a work in progress, I guess, for the board to talk about in the future?
I think it definitely can be. The points 1 and 2 in terms of the posting is how it's handled, is how we've handled it, I guess, as a board, and I believe how it's supposed to be. The third item in terms of large numbers is something that we did talk about last week, and we certainly can talk about going forward. The question that came up was how to handle a lot of comment without being disruptive to the meeting. The point of public comment is to allow people to be able to have their say as part of the meeting. And so the question that I raised was, how can one handle lots and lots and lots of comments? And this was the feedback.
Can I say one? I know we talked about this last week, as Ann said, but I want to bring something to the board's attention that Bob may or may not mention before tonight's end. Is I spoke with a colleague in Wakefield, who's the chair, Ed Dombrowski, and they are doing a little summit next week with all the neighboring towns. I don't know if you're aware of this, Mark, yet, but it's next Tuesday night.
Yep, 7 p.m. In fact, I was going to put that on our agenda. Initially, it was going to be a closed group, and then they decided to make it a broader group. And what I wanted to offer to the board is the opportunity for any and all to participate. We just need to know if we'll have quorum, and if so, then essentially to post.
Okay, yeah, I was under the impression when I spoke to Ed today that he was going to ask the town manager and a few of the board members, but obviously if all the board members wanted to attend, I don't see any problem with that, but it's going to be informative, best practices, and how to handle public comment and a number of other topics. So I think that'd be very useful to see what other towns are doing as instructed by you last week, or that we all discussed, and to, see some of the faces that are going through the same thing.
Well, yeah. I had thought it was about more about the sort of plans for reopening. I didn't realize it was broader than that.
Yeah, that was my understanding also. It was about kind of restart. And Bob, you may have the best insight here.
No, I have the same insight you and Ann do. That's Carlos, that's all news to me if that's going to happen. I do expect to get an agenda sometime tomorrow from Wakefield. They know that we have to post you tomorrow if there's going to be a quorum, and I'm going to assume there will be. So as soon as I have an agenda, I'll certainly forward it to the board. But I was also under the impression it was really just to have a coordinated discussion about a reopening, if you will. That could have changed.
Okay, I heard differently, but whatever's going to be discussed will be discussed.
When you were talking to town council, I did go out and take a look at Winchester and Linfield. And although in the case of Linfield, I am seeing public comment posted on their agenda. In sitting through their audio only meeting, there was no public comment, and there was no public comment in the Linfield meeting. Did you have any discussions with town council as to how bad is that? Are they just doing it because it's a pandemic? It was eye-opening to me that those two towns specifically were so different than what we've been doing.
I can answer the Linfield part. Linfield has not had public comment in over 20 years, and there's only one resident that has complained.
Very different town.
Right.
I suggest that I think this is worthy of more discussion, and we should put it onto our agenda for the next meeting to kind of continue our discussions of how do we improve it, how do we make it as useful to the citizens as possible, and also allowing us to conduct our business.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, let's shift over to two topics related to the Reading Municipal Light Department. The first one relating to the payment to the town discussions that have been taking place. The second one related to the 20-year agreement. Vanessa or Karen, do you want to introduce it, or just we want to have Johnny? Would you like to make a statement, or how would you like to proceed?
Sure, I'd be happy to, unless Vanessa or Karen, who've been attending our meetings religiously, and we thank you very much for that. Yes, I'd certainly like to be able to talk to it if I could, and then take any comments off of that. First, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us to the meeting, and it's been very enlightening, and we will definitely start doing this more often. I think it really enhances the communication between us and between the town, and between quite frankly, the 4 towns that we serve as well. And as you know, the RMLD is doing what they do best, which is making sure that you get the power that you need and keeping the power on during this coronavirus. And our general manager is, amongst other things, has created multiple teams so that one team is isolated from another in case there are issues that come up. And there's many other things that she has done, and I think has been very much in front of the entire virus. The only good news, if there is any that comes out of this, is that the RMLD still has rates that are approximately 1/2 of National Grid or Eversource. So for those individuals who are losing or have lost their jobs, it makes it much easier, at least to face that, as opposed to getting double that, at some point in the future. So let me spend just a little bit of time talking about why we're wrestling with this, because I think it's very important. I don't know how many of you know the background. Obviously, Karen does, and Vanessa does, and Mark, certainly you, having been to our meetings as well. We have 2 payments, basically, that we make to the town. One is what's called above-the-line payment, which is it's formulaic. It's 2% of the net plan of the RMLD times the percentage of usage across our 4-town system. And that's cut and dried. We know those numbers. They're in the packet that has sort of been sent out and or posted, and has been very straightforward. The other payment to the town is what's called below the line. And this is terminology certainly I didn't invent. It's been around for a long time. But the below the line payment is, first and foremost, it's a voluntary payment. But, we've been doing it for decades. We know the town depends on it. It's something that can't go away. And it's basically, if you want to think about it, it's a payment for the fact that the town put the initial assets of the RMLD into this pot that serves 4 towns, which then became state law mandated, essentially. And so at that point in time, there was a difference between the RMLD being tied at the hip to the town of Reading and now serving 4 towns. And so we had to find some way of compensating Reading for doing that. So you might think of it as an annuity. So the assets were put into a place and you get a certain percentage back every year from those assets. And that's what basically has been going on for many decades now. And it's worked out very well, I think. I think it's been part of the whole reason, part of the reason anyway, that the town of Reading has done an excellent job in being fiscally conservative and is ready for this as much as they can be, as any town can be, for what's just happened. And the RMLD is the same way. I mean, we've got a number of sort of pots of money, funds, et cetera, which were used for things through the oil crisis and other areas that really needed to have investment. And that's why we maintain them. So the prior methodology we had used was basically a CPU type of thing, Consumer Price Index, CPI, that worked for a number of years. But what we found in the last couple of years when we did this study back in 2018 is that our usage in terms of kilowatt hours was actually declining. And yet our costs were increasing. And we had a huge amount of maintenance we still had to put into the system because it just didn't happen in previous years. So it was almost a perfect storm for us. And we call it convergence because our revenues are slightly going down, our costs are going up, and we can't afford to keep making the payment to the town the way we made it in the past. So very difficult situation for all of us to be in, right? Because all of us on the board of commissioners are residents of the town of Reading. We want to make sure that that's being done correctly. By the same token, we serve 4 towns, and we're not the largest supplier of electricity to the system. So in light of that, we've been struggling with this since the end of 2018, trying to find a methodology that would be appropriate and would satisfy everyone's needs. And everyone's needs, by the way, are all those customers in these 4 towns. It's the Citizens Advisory Board, which represents the 4 towns. It's the staff at RMLD, and it's certainly the town of Reading. I mean, this is just top of our list in terms of making sure that we do the right thing. So we've examined and have presented many approaches to how we might solve this. Mark Dockster knows extremely well because he provided half of them, staying up for, I don't know how many hours you spent on yours, Mark, but we've all sort of been there, quite a few, and we very much appreciate the input. But none of them quite met the needs of what I've just described. And the feedback we've gotten from the Citizens Advisory Board and from also what we're trying to do for the town, et cetera, just didn't seem to make it right. So we've pulled together what we think is a methodology. Hasn't been accepted yet. As a matter of fact, I've called a special meeting for tomorrow night of the RMLD board to go in detail into what is being proposed. I'm going to share that with you here very quickly. But basically it's to try to get to closure on this. And so we all kind of know what is in place, and to try to push it through perhaps by our May board meeting. So what are we doing? What are we proposing? The first thing is we're proposing that instead of making our last payment under the present situation where we froze the payment for 2 years, on July 1st, 2021, we're going to extend that payment to the end of the year. That's what one of the proposals is.
John, I apologize for interrupting. The information John is about to present is available on the rmld.com website, and you can view it here as well. There's actually another presentation, Mark, I think you're sharing this. It's in a supplemental packet for their meeting tomorrow, if everyone wants to open that up. Thanks, John.
That's correct. Thank you very much, Vanessa. That's great. So we start by using something called the kilowatt hour consumption, because it's the purest form of measurement. It's not revenue. It's not any of the other things that are downstream. It's really what we're in business to do. We take and it's measured exactly. So we know our total kilowatt hour consumption, and we're suggesting that what we do is we take a 3-year weighted average. So that's a historical weighted average of the kilowatt hour consumption, and then multiply this by a variable called mils per kilowatt hour. And the reason we multiply it by that is because there are industry benchmarks that talk to what all of the other municipals in Massachusetts and across the country use as a measure of providing revenue sources to their towns. And it typically, at max, goes into about 3 mils or so, maybe just a little bit over. What we're proposing is using 3.875 mils per kilowatt hour, which is substantially above the benchmark, as a mechanism for basically putting in place a calculation for this formula. And the reason we're doing this, or suggesting this, is we're not doing it yet. We haven't gotten approval. There's no motion to approve this yet. It is to have a very simple formula that's easily tracked, and we can see what's happening with very, very simple calculations. So the 3-year average of the kilowatt hours is a huge aid in helping to roll out any major change in consumption that might have with coronavirus, with weather conditions. And by the way, mild weather, such as we've had in the recent winter, so far are far outweighing any other variable in the system. There are multiple variables that it's very, very difficult to kind of peel them apart and understand which one does what to whom. And the other one is like energy consumption has been going down because of LEDs use 1/10 the amount of power, right? And we're all having them in our homes and businesses. And as a matter of fact, the RMLD puts programs in place to help both commercial, industrial customers everywhere in our 4-town area to put in the most energy efficient things that they could. Sort of counterintuitive, right, in terms of running a business. Why are you helping people consume less power? But that's what our charter is to help the communities that we're in and maintain very, very low rates. So all those 3 or 4 different things may have an impact in terms of what the total is. But the one thing we can measure on a historical basis anyway, at the end of every year, is how many kilowatt hours are out there. And then we can kind of decide what to do with it. The good thing about this, as I mentioned, is that if there is an impact, if there's a drop of 5% or 8% in terms of the COVID, and by the way, we haven't seen that happen yet. If there is a drop in our kilowatt hour consumption, this 3-year rolling average smooths that out. So there's not a huge impact to the town in terms of the payment that we would suggest. As a matter of fact, it also helps the town if we can get our economic development program together to actually increase the electrical usage, because the same thing happens in reverse. The number paid to the town goes up, and it's just a very impressive sort of way of thinking about not letting something impact you immediately where you have to do something very dire to confront it. Now we've got certain the programs that are in the capital program, which are above the line. A few of those might get deferred, but for the most part, we're replacing this. Yes, thank you very much, Mark, for showing that. We have to do this maintenance. We can't have the transformers blowing up. They're 15 to 20 years old. They're end of life. We've got to maintain them. We've got a $6 to $8 million program to put in a substation, which should have been put in 1.5 to 2 years ago, to service our biggest customer over in Wilmington. We can't survive without doing that. And so those are things that are moving forward immediately. We've got the funds to do it, and our general manager, Colleen O'Brien, is moving forward on those. So tomorrow's RMLD meeting will be addressing this, and we're going to be doing live, question and answer, which is the second part of the second chart that's being put up, just to say that what if we increase the RMLD usage by 1%? What if we have a COVID impact of 1 year for 2020, and then the next year it's back to business as usual? So we've got a spreadsheet, we've got all the numbers in it, we can easily put in +1, -1, it ripples through, it shows you what the results are. And just doing a quick calculation, if we were to hold steady in terms of kilowatt hour usage over the next 5 years, the additional payment to the town would be on the order of $300,000 as cumulative. So we're trying not to impact what we've got for you today. We're trying to make it feasible to get more money, if at all possible, tied to the economic development of the town. And if there is a hiccup, that's long-lasting hiccup, we're doing our best to mitigate it in any way we possibly can. So that's kind of where we're headed. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Board members have questions, comments?
Hi, Mark. I'll weigh in. So to provide a little background for those watching at home, this has been an ongoing conversation between the select board and the RMLD commissioners. It has been discussed in front of town meeting as well. Mark, if you don't mind putting on the screen the other PDF attachment, that might be more helpful.
Tell me which one it is. I just looked on the site. I didn't see it. Is it in the packet, not in the?
It's a separate post. It should be on the. Actually, it's on the. I'm sure it's on the RMLD website.
It is on the RMLD website. Mark, if you go to rmld.com under Board of Commissioners and click on the supplemental attachment for their April 30th meeting. And the reason I mentioned that one, so there, John did explain there are two issues here that the commissioners will be voting on. One is extending the current arrangement with the payment we have, which is at approximately $2.48 million through the end of the calendar year. Previously, it had been agreed to be kept until the end of the fiscal year for us, which is June.
Right.
So that's item one. Yes, exactly. That one, Mark. So, Mark, I know you had worked to present some alternative proposals that would provide some guardrails. I know the commissioners and the CAB were had decided not to pursue those. Those would have provided a bit of a minimum and a maximum for what the town could expect. So as we look at this chart here, what we see is that there is the possibility for fluctuation at the order of, tens of thousands of dollars over the course of several years, depending on the usage that John mentioned. And there has been a decreasing trend in usage. The likelihood at this point, it's always tough to predict the future, but from everything I've heard at RMLD meetings is that the likelihood of a drastic increase is not necessarily something we can rely on at this point in time, unless there's some significant development in one of the four towns. There, like I said, though, there has been this downward trend, and I appreciate that the RMLD is investing in infrastructure and making sure that we get the great service, continue to get the great service that we do. But I am a little apprehensive about the changes, the numbers that are visible in this chart, in that over the course of, approximately 5 years, that payment, depending on the impact of COVID by the end of the year and continued decreases, could see a drop of, I'm looking here, $70,000 to the town budget. And that's a police officer, that's a teacher, that funds would need to be found elsewhere. So I appreciate that we're trying to reach a compromise here. But I'm a little nervous about what this means for our long-term budget impacts.
If I may?
Yes, John.
There's no question that we can't guarantee the future. You can't guarantee the future. We can't guarantee the future. We are subject to perhaps even more variables than in town in terms of who we serve and whether they are part of the 20-year agreement and whether we can continue to purchase the power at the rates we've been able to in the past, and whether we have any nationally major emergencies that would come in. Thereby, we have to be very fiscally conservative. I would argue that if you're looking out 5 years and seeing $10,000, $20,000, that's in the noise level. We're talking 2.4 million, 2.5 million. And my hope is that we'll find ways during that period of time to make that a moot point, and we'll increase that number instead of decreasing that number. So, the spreadsheets show one thing. The one thing I can only guarantee you about these spreadsheets is that none of them are correct, right? None of them are correct. And as a matter of fact, if you were to, the usual way we'd approach this is to do a Monte Carlo analysis and say, somewhere in that cloud, there's a number that's correct. This is our sort of nearest approach to it, to be able to at least show and get people's reasoned opinions about does this methodology work? And that's what we're really struggling with, is trying to find a methodology that's simple, straightforward, and tries to, and by the way, you'll notice that in the first year after 2022, the number actually goes up, right? So it goes up to 2.5 million in that particular year. So it can go either way depending on what the glitches are that are happening. And in each one of these cells, we have an explanation about what could happen and what could not